Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com with part 2 of my discussion about the global temperature record. In part 1 of this series, I showed that official government temperature graphs do not match the historical record. In part 2, I'm going to show you how the data is being abused and in many places simply fabricated. This map from the US government from June of 2021 shows the world as being a very hot place. And they show temperatures in Central Africa as being the warmest on record. But if we look at their other map of actual temperatures, we see something very different. They didn't have any actual thermometer measurements from Central Africa. Gray areas represent missing data. The US government declared record heat in an area where they had no thermometer readings. Unlike the US government's fake surface temperatures, satellites do have actual temperatures from Central Africa from June of 2021. And they showed that temperatures in Central Africa were just about average. These claims of record heat from US government scientists had no basis in reality. During that same time period, Antarctica was having their coldest winter on record. You can see the very cold temperatures in the satellite data. But the NOAA surface temperature map hid the cold in Antarctica. Their map showed the world as being red hot. But satellites showed that the world's temperature during June of 2021 was just about average. Now let's look at NOAA's actual historical record from Central Africa. Using my new graphing tool, we're going to look at every single daily temperature record which NOAA has for the Congo. You can see that for Brazzaville they have 18,975 temperature readings beginning in about 1947. They have no data prior to 1947. Now I'm going to cycle quickly through the other stations in the Congo. You can see that the data is very fragmented and it's very limited. There simply isn't enough data to draw any meaningful conclusions about the long-term temperature history of the Congo. Not one single station has enough data to draw any meaningful conclusions about the long-term temperature trends in the Congo. NOAA was trying to claim record heat in the Congo without having any meaningful data to back their claims up. And that was their data from the good part of the Congo. The other half of the Congo has even less data. Let's cycle through the stations in that part. It should be starting to become clear that the global surface temperature record is nothing more than an illusion. There isn't enough data to draw any meaningful conclusions. NOAA is using fragmented, meaningless data to create a fraudulent global surface temperature graph. Now let's look at all of their data for Nigeria. Once again, we see the same thing. There isn't enough data to draw any sort of meaningful conclusions. The US government is simply making data up. The thermometer data does not support their conclusions. Now let's go across the ocean and look at the data for Argentina. Once again, we see the same problem. There isn't enough data to draw any sort of meaningful conclusions about long-term temperature trends in Argentina. One of the few places that does have an adequate temperature record is the United States. Let's take a look at all of the stations in Missouri. I'm going to cycle through all of these stations very quickly, and you'll be able to see that many of the stations in Missouri have a good, high-quality, consistent, long-term temperature record. We should be able to draw meaningful conclusions about the temperature record in Missouri because the daily temperature data is quite adequate. This is the kind of data which is required to generate long-term temperature trends. But as I mentioned earlier, the United States is one of the very few places on Earth which has this sort of high-quality long-term temperature data. This map from NOAA shows the number of stations where they have daily temperature data from 1891 to 1920. The vast majority of the high-quality data is from the United States. There's also a decent record from Western Europe and parts of Australia, but most of the world is simply missing data. The US temperature data is very high quality, and as of 1999, NASA showed cooling in the United States from the 1930s through the end of the 20th century. But unfortunately, after the year 1999, U.S. government agencies started tampering with the data, and they turned this cooling trend into a warming trend. This map from 20 years ago showed the adjustments which were being made by U.S. government agencies. They were heating up most of the country with artificial upwards adjustments, and since then their data tampering has actually gotten much worse. The purple graph shows the U.S. government's measured U.S. temperature data. Afternoon temperatures in the United States peaked during the 1930s and have cooled quite a bit since then. But government agencies tamper with the data to turn this long-term cooling trend into a warming trend. NOAA cools the past more than 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and they warm present temperatures almost 1 degree Fahrenheit. That's about 2.5 degrees of data tampering. For most of the world, the U.S. government is making up fake temperature data, and for the United States, where we have good data, they're tampering with it to turn a cooling trend into a warming trend. These temperature graphs from government agencies are neither credible nor legitimate, and the fact that all four of these graphs agree so closely is very troubling. None of these four graphs even vaguely represents Earth's history, and they're all very close to each other. If we look at the ClimateGate emails, we can see how these graphs all got to be into such a broken state. This 1999 email from Briffa to Mann and Jones is very telling. I know there's pressure to present a nice, tidy story as regards apparent unprecedented warming in 1,000 years or more in the proxy data. These scientists were being pressured, probably by politicians, to create unprecedented warming. The 1990 report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change showed that the medieval warm period around the year 1200 was much warmer than recent temperatures. But then around the year 1995, climate researchers came under pressure to get rid of the medieval warm period. And by 1998, Michael Mann had done exactly what he was told to do. He got rid of the medieval warm period, and he created unprecedented warming in the 20th century. These graphs from government scientists are fake. They're the product of political pressure and collusion. I could go on for hours with other documented evidence of collusion and data tampering, but in the interest of brevity, I'm going to stop it here. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on this scam for the past 14 years. You can visit Toto, Kyrie, Caesar, Upala, and Toki on the web at realclimatescience.com.